Quietness, not brilliance, was the reason Vincent Marino hired her. With only 3 weeks left before his father passed away, the dying man's final wish was to hear live piano music every night, under strict rules, play the classics, speak only when spoken to, and never look the family in the eye. Breaking all 3 rules on her 4th night happened naturally when Nora chose to play a song that should have been buried alongside 30 bodies. The piano at the St. Jude Hotel had 2 dead keys. The middle E and the G sharp above it simply didn't make a sound. Striking them was like stepping on a hollow floorboard, a dull, wooden thud that threw off the entire rhythm of whatever piece Nora was trying to drag out of the battered instrument. She adjusted her repertoire accordingly. She played a lot of modified Debussy. She played jazz standards that allowed her to skip the dead zones. Nobody noticed anyway. The patrons of the St. Jude lobby bar were mostly businessmen killing time before a delayed flight, or couples arguing in hushed, vicious whispers over watered-down scotch. They didn't care about the music. They just needed noise to fill the gaps in their own failures. Nora kept her eyes on the keys. She always did. If you looked up, you ran the risk of making eye contact, and eye contact meant conversation. Conversation meant a disruption to the 3 hours of autopilot she relied on to earn her $75 a night. It was a Tuesday, raining hard enough that the lobby windows looked like static on a dead television screen. Nora was halfway through a passable rendition of Autumn Leaves when a hand clamped down on the edge of her tip jar. She didn't stop playing. She just glanced over. The hand was massive. The knuckles were heavily scarred, the skin thick and calloused, contrasting sharply with the immaculate, tailored cuff of a charcoal suit jacket. The man attached to the hand was built like a cinder block. He didn't look like he belonged in the St. Jude. He looked like he owned the St. Jude, or was at least in the business of burning it down for the insurance money. He dropped a folded stack of bills into the glass jar. It didn't clink like coins. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. $100 bills. 5 of them. "Mr. Marino wants a word," the man said. His voice was gravel, quiet and devoid of any question mark. Nora hit the dead E key by accident. Thwack! She stopped. She knew the name. Everyone in the city who read a newspaper, or watched the local news, or simply had a pulse, knew the name Marino. They owned the shipping ports. They owned half the sanitation contracts. Depending on which federal indictment you read, they also owned a small army of judges. "I'm working," Nora said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "You're done for the night," the man replied. He didn't move. He didn't threaten her. He didn't have to. The air around him felt heavy, dense with an implied violence that made Nora's stomach twist into a cold knot. 10 minutes later, she was sitting in the back of a black SUV. The leather seats smelled like new car spray and faint cigarette smoke. The rain drummed against the tinted glass. Nora stared at her hands, her fingers tracing the calluses on her fingertips. Fear is a funny thing. When it's sharp and sudden, you panic. When it's cold and absolute, you just go numb. She was numb. They didn't drive to a warehouse. They didn't drive to a dark alley. They pulled up to a glass and steel high-rise downtown, the kind of building that housed corporate law firms and tech startups. The cinderblock man led her up a private elevator to the penthouse suite. The doors slid open to reveal an office that was violently minimalist. White walls, grey carpets, a desk carved from a single slab of dark oak. Behind the desk stood Vincent Marino. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a tired accountant. He was in his late 30s, wearing a navy sweater over a collared shirt. He was trim, with sharp features and dark, hollowed-out eyes that spoke of chronic insomnia. He was pouring a glass of sparkling water. Nora, he said, not looking up as he screwed the cap back onto the bottle. Drink? No. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. No, thank you. Vincent finally looked at her. His eyes were entirely flat. There was no warmth, no malice, no curiosity. It was like looking into a dry well. My father is Carmine Marino, Vincent said, walking around the desk. He leaned against it, crossing his arms. He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him a month. Maybe less. The pain is significant. Nora stood completely still, her wet coat dripping onto the pristine grey carpet. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. He doesn't want to die in a hospital. He's at the estate. We have nurses, doctors, the machines, but he's restless. Vincent rubbed the bridge of his nose, a brief flash of humanity breaking through the icy exterior. He used to love the piano. My mother played. She's been dead 20 years. The house has a Steinway. It hasn't been touched since. Vincent took a sip of his water. I had my people look around. I didn't want a concert pianist. I didn't want a prima donna who throws a fit if the room is too cold. I went to 3 different hotels this week. You're the only one who didn't try to smile at the crowd. You just play. I need the money, Nora said, before she could filter herself. It was the absolute, pathetic truth. Her rent was 3 months behind. The loan sharks her ex-boyfriend had involved her with were texting her threats daily. I know, Vincent said calmly. You owe $14,000 to a man named Ricky. You have $18 in your checking account. Your landlord has drafted an eviction notice. Nora's blood ran cold. The numbness vanished, replaced by a spike of pure defensive terror. You looked into me. I don't let strangers into my father's house without opening them up first, Vincent said. Ricky won't bother you anymore. The debt is settled. In exchange, you will come to the estate every evening at 7. You will play until 10. You will play classical music. Bach, Beethoven, Satie. Nothing loud, nothing jarring. You will not speak to my father unless he speaks first. You will not ask questions about who comes and goes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it onto the oak desk. $10,000 a week in cash, until he passes. Vincent met her eyes again. Do we have an agreement, or do I need to call Ricky and tell him your debt is reinstated? It wasn't a choice. It was a trap with a gold-plated floor. Nora looked at the envelope. She thought about the St. Jude, the dead piano keys, the smell of stale beer. She thought about her empty apartment. 7 to 10, Nora said. Vincent nodded once. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 6. The Marino estate sat on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, hidden behind 10-foot wrought-iron gates and a thick perimeter of ancient pine trees. Approaching it felt like entering a maximum security prison designed by a billionaire. Cameras tracked the SUV's progress. Men in dark jackets with earpieces stood smoking by the garage, their eyes tracking Nora as she stepped out of the vehicle. The inside of the house was a jarring contradiction. The architecture was sweeping and grand. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, a massive chandelier hanging over a double staircase. But it smelled like a hospital ward. The sharp, chemical stench of bleach and surgical spirit completely overpowered the faint scent of lemon polish and expensive wood. A woman in scrubs patted Nora down in the foyer. Thoroughly, efficiently. Once cleared, Vincent appeared from a side hallway. He looked worse than yesterday. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid. He gestured for Nora to follow him. They walked into a sunken living room that had been entirely repurposed. The velvet sofas and coffee tables had been shoved to the edges. In the center of the room, Near a massive bay window overlooking the dark, churning ocean, sat a mechanized hospital bed. Beside it, an oxygen concentrator hummed steadily, a rhythmic hiss-click-hiss that dictated the pulse of the room. IV bags hung from metal poles like strange, clear fruit, and there, in the corner, sat the Steinway. It was a beautiful, terrifying machine of polished black wood and ivory. "Dad," Vincent said. His voice was different here, softer, almost hesitant. "She's here, the piano player." Carmine Marino looked nothing like the photos Nora had seen in old newspaper clippings. The ruthless patriarch who had allegedly ordered hits from a prison payphone was gone. In his place was a frail, hollowed-out skeleton, draped in expensive silk pajamas. His skin was the color of old parchment, bruised yellow and purple around the IV sites. He didn't open his eyes. He just lifted a trembling, skeletal finger. "Play!" Carmine rasped. His voice was wet and weak, like dry leaves crumbling. Nora walked over to the bench. She sat down. The keys were flawless. She pressed the middle E. It rang out, clear and sustained, resonating in her chest. She began with Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. It was safe. It was beautiful. It was the kind of music you played when you wanted to fill a room without demanding attention. For 3 hours, Nora played. She transitioned from Chopin to Debussy, leaning heavily on the soft pedal. The house around her moved in a strange, muffled silence. Men would enter the room, whisper something into Vincent's ear, and leave. Vincent sat in a leather armchair in the corner, reading documents, occasionally glancing at his father. Carmine never moved. If it weren't for the slow rise and fall of his chest and the beep of the heart monitor, Nora would have thought he was already dead. When the clock on the mantel struck 10, Vincent stood up. "Enough," he said softly. Nora stopped mid-bar. She closed the lid over the keys, gathered her coat, and walked out. The envelope of cash was waiting for her on the console table in the foyer. This became her reality. For 3 nights, the routine was identical. The ride in the dark, the pat down, the antiseptic smell, the endless rolling chords of classical music. Nora found a strange rhythm in it. It was incredibly depressing, yet uniquely peaceful. She was no longer a person. She was a mechanism for delivering sound. She didn't have to worry about rent. She didn't have to worry about loan sharks. She just had to play the right notes and ignore the fact that she was soundtracking a monster's slow descent into hell. But she noticed things. You can't sit in a room for 3 hours a night and not notice things. She noticed that Vincent's hands shook when he poured water for his father. She noticed the way Carmine's brow furrowed in agony when the pain medication began to wear off, long before the nurse was scheduled to administer the next dose. She'd noticed the suffocating, unbearable weight of things left unsaid between the 2 men. They rarely spoke. When they did, it was logistical. "Are you cold? Do you need water? Did the doctor call?" They were 2 men drowning in a vast ocean of blood and money, unable to throw a life preserver to each other. On the 4th night, the storm hit. It was a torrential downpour, wind howling against the reinforced glass of the bay windows. The ocean outside was a black, thrashing void. The tension in the house was thicker than usual. 2 of Vincent's men had arrived earlier, soaked and bleeding, sparking a flurry of hushed, frantic activity in the hallway. Vincent was pacing. He hadn't sat in his armchair once. He kept checking his phone, his jaw clenched so tight Nora thought it might shatter. Carmine was having a bad night. The cancer was eating through the morphine barrier. He was shifting restlessly, letting out low, guttural moans that made the hair on Nora's arms stand up. The nurse adjusted his IV, murmuring apologies, but it wasn't helping. Nora was playing Bach's Goldberg variations. It felt wrong. The clinical precision of the math in Bach's music clashed violently with the raw, messy agony of the dying man in the bed. "Stop!" Carmine gasped suddenly. Nora froze. Her hands hovered over the keys. Carmine opened his eyes. They were milky, sunken deep into his skull, but they found her in the dim light. "Stop that noise, it's just noise." Vincent stopped pacing. "Dad, it's just the piano. It helps you sleep." "It's loud," the old man hissed, clutching at his stomach. "Play. Play something real. Something that means a damn thing." Vincent looked at Nora. He gave her a sharp, impatient nod. "Fix it." Nora stared at the keys. What did a man like Carmine Marino consider real? What did a man who had built an empire on broken bones want to hear on his deathbed? She closed her eyes. She thought of the rain. She thought of her own mother, who had worked herself into an early grave, humming a strange, nameless tune while washing dishes in their cramped kitchen. It wasn't classical. It wasn't jazz. It was an old folk melody, something passed down through generations, originally from the old country. Her mother called it a mourning song, played when the dirt was finally thrown over the coffin. It was a song about inevitability. Nora placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play a chord. She started with a single note, a low, resonant C. She let it ring out, filling the silence. Then she added a slow, dissonant harmony. The melody was haunting. It didn't resolve. It climbed up a minor scale, lingered on a tragic, sharp note, and tumbled back down like falling water. It was raw, unpolished, and dripping with a heavy, ancient sorrow. It was the antithesis of the sterile, controlled environment of the estate. For the first minute, the only sound was the piano, the wind, and the hiss of the oxygen machine. Then, Carmine gasped. It wasn't a gasp of pain. It was a sharp, violently sudden intake of air. Nora kept playing. The rhythm had taken her over, pulling the memory of her mother's tired voice through her fingers and into the ivory keys. She leaned into a heavy, dramatic crescendo, the minor chords vibrating in the wood of the piano. Behind her, the heart monitor began to beep faster. Beep, 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 beep. Nora thought the music was soothing him, lulling him into some deep emotional release. She softened her touch, letting the melody weave down into a quiet, rolling bass line. Where? Carmine's voice wasn't a raspy whisper anymore. It tore through the room, ragged and desperate. Nora's fingers faltered. She glanced over her shoulder. Carmine was fighting against the bedsheets. He was trying to sit up, his claw-like hands gripping the metal guardrails. The IV lines pulled taut. His milky eyes were wide, blown out with a mixture of absolute terror and disbelief. He was staring at her. No, not at her. At the piano. At the sound. "Dad?" Vincent took a quick step forward, his phone dropping onto the carpet. "Who sent you?" Carmine choked out, spittle flying from his dry lips. He pointed a trembling, bruised finger at Nora. "Who? How do you know that?" The monitor was frantic now, a shrill, overlapping warning. The nurse ran into the room from the hallway, pushing past Vincent. Nora stopped playing entirely. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, filled only by the machine's alarms and the old man's ragged, panicked breathing. "Where did you hear that song?" Carmine demanded, his voice cracking, tears suddenly spilling over his sallow cheeks. "It's gone. It burned. It was supposed to burn." Vincent moved. He didn't walk. He lunged. Before Nora could even stand up, Vincent was there. He slammed his hand down on the piano lid, shoving it forward. Nora yanked her hands back just in time. The heavy wooden lid crashed shut with a sound like a gunshot, echoing violently off the vaulted ceilings. "Out of the chair!" Vincent snarled. The tired accountant was gone. The mob boss was entirely present. His eyes were wide, animalistic, his chest heaving. Nora scrambled backward, her hip clipping the piano bench, sending it screeching across the marble floor. I'm sorry, I just—" "Shut up!" Vincent grabbed her by the arm. His grip was like a steel vise, bruising instantly. He hauled her away from the piano, shoving her toward the center of the room. "What the hell did you just play?" "It's just a song," Nora stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "My mother used to hum it. It's nothing, it's just a folk song." "Liar!" Carmine wheezed from the bed. The nurse was desperately trying to push him back down, injecting something into his IV port. She told them. She survived. Vincent froze. He looked from his dying father to Nora, his expression twisting into something horrifyingly complex. It was fear. Vincent Marino was terrified. He looked back at Nora, his grip tightening until she whimpered. "Who is your mother?" Vincent's voice dropped to a lethal, deadly quiet. "She's dead," Nora cried, struggling against his hold. "She died 5 years ago. Let me go." "What was her name?" Vincent demanded, shaking her once, violently. Anna Kovac!" Vincent stared at her. He didn't blink. The rain lashed against the window pane, a violent staccato rhythm. Carmine fell back against the pillows, the sedative the nurse administered finally taking hold. His eyes fluttered shut, but his mouth kept moving, whispering something into the sterile air. Vincent slowly let go of Nora's arm. He took a step back, wiping a hand over his mouth. He looked at the closed piano, then at Nora, as if seeing her for the first time. "Anna Kovac," Vincent repeated, his voice barely audible over the storm. Anna Kovac didn't just know a folk song. He turned his back to her, staring out at the black ocean. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Nora stood trembling, rubbing her bruised arm, terrified to move toward the door. 30 years ago, Vincent said, speaking to the glass, a syndicate out of Chicago tried to move in on my father's territory. It was a bloodbath. My father ordered a hit on their leadership, a dinner at a private club. We barred the doors. We burned the building down. Nora's breath hitched. She didn't want to hear this. She knew instinctively that hearing this was a death sentence. "There was a piano player at the club that night," Vincent continued, turning his head slightly to look at her in the reflection of the glass. "A young girl, hired for the evening. She was playing a specific, very strange piece of music when my father's men locked the doors. My father was across the street. He said that melody haunted him. He said he heard it through the flames." Vincent turned around fully. The hollow exhaustion was back in his eyes, but it was mixed with a cold, predatory focus. "My father ordered his men to check the ashes. Nobody made it out. 30 bodies. That song died in the fire." Vincent walked slowly toward her, stopping inches away. "So tell me, Nora, how exactly did Anna Kovac survive?" The guest room on the 3rd floor of the Marino estate was larger than Nora's entire apartment. It had a king-sized bed draped in heavy linen, an ensuite bathroom clad in dark slate, and a balcony overlooking the jagged cliffs. The door locked from the outside. Nora didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her wet coat discarded on a velvet chaise lounge, and stared at the heavy oak door. The adrenaline had burned out hours ago, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion that made her bones ache. 30 bodies. A fire. A massacre. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to reconcile the terrifying image Vincent had painted with the memory of her mother. Anna Kovacs had been a frail, deeply sad woman. She worked double shifts at a diner, smelled constantly of bleach and cheap coffee, and spent her evenings staring blankly at the television. She didn't talk about her youth. She didn't talk about Nora's father. But there were the scars. Nora swallowed hard, the memory surfacing with sickening clarity. When Nora was 10, she had walked into the bathroom while her mother was changing. Anna's back was a landscape of twisted, shiny pink tissue, stretching from her right shoulder down to her waist. "A cooking accident before you were born," Anna had said, quickly pulling her shirt down. Her voice had been sharp, bordering on panic. It wasn't a cooking accident. She had walked through hell. At 7 in the morning, the lock clicked. Vincent walked in. He carried a silver tray with a French press, 2 porcelain cups, and a plate of toast. He wore a fresh suit, but his eyes were bloodshot. The exhaustion clinging to him was physical, weighing down his shoulders. He didn't look like a man who had just taken a hostage. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a very high building. He set the tray on a small glass table near the window and sat down. He poured 2 cups of black coffee. "Sit," Vincent said. It wasn't a request. Nora stood up. Her legs were trembling, but she forced herself to walk over to the chair opposite him. She didn't touch the coffee. "I ran a background check on Anna Kovacs at 3 in the morning, Vincent said, leaning back. He studied her face, searching for a tell. According to the state, she immigrated from Hungary 32 years ago. She got a social security number. She paid taxes. She had a daughter. She died of heart failure 5 years ago in a county hospital." Nora stared at her hands. "That's all there is." "No," Vincent corrected softly. "That's the ghost she built. The woman who burned in the Chicago fire was named Magda Varga. We knew the names of everyone on the payroll that night. My father had the club wired for weeks. He knew the waitstaff, the bartenders, the musicians." "Then you know she was just a piano player," Nora said, her voice shaking. "She was just playing a gig, like me. She didn't have anything to do with your family's war. She survived a fire that melted steel beams, Nora." Vincent took a slow sip of his coffee. "She walked out of a locked building. And for 30 years, my father believed a loose end was buried in the ash. But she wasn't. She was out there, raising you." "I don't know anything," Nora said. The tears finally spilled over, hot and humiliating. She hated crying in front of him. She wiped her cheeks aggressively with the back of her hand. "I swear to God. She never told me anything about Chicago. She never talked about a fire. I just thought she was sad." Vincent watched her. The flat, deadened look in his eyes from their first meeting was gone. He was dissecting her, tearing apart her grief and fear to see if there was any deception underneath. "I believe you," he said finally. Nora blinked. "You do?" "Yes. You're too terrified to be lying." Vincent set his cup down. "You play the piano at a 2-star hotel for tips. You owe money to a street-level loan shark. If Anna had taken anything of value from the club that night, you wouldn't be living in poverty. You're clean." Nora let out a shaky breath. "Then let me go." "I can't do that." The absolute calm in his voice made the words hit harder. "Why?" Nora demanded, her fear spiking into sudden, desperate anger. "If you know I don't know anything, why keep me here? I won't go to the police. I don't care about your father or your syndicate, because my father doesn't believe you," Vincent said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "He is dying, Nora. His mind is fracturing. The cancer has spread to his liver, maybe his brain. Last night, he hallucinated that the men from Chicago were standing in his bedroom. He believes your mother was a spy. He believes she memorized the club's ledgers and coded them into that song. That's insane, Nora breathed. He's a man who has spent 50 years looking over his shoulder. Paranoia is the only religion he has left. Vincent rubbed his jaw, the stubble grating against his palm. He wants to interrogate you. He wants to break your fingers until you tell him what the melody means. Nora pushed back in her chair, pressing herself against the upholstery as if she could sink into it and disappear. "And you're going to let him?" Vincent looked at her. For a fraction of a second, the Mafia Boss vanished, replaced by a son crushed under the weight of an impossible inheritance. "I run this family now," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I handle their ports, the politicians, the money. But in this house, as long as he is breathing, his word is law. The men downstairs are loyal to him first. If I try to put you in a car and send you home, they will drag you back inside, and I will lose the fragile grip I have on the transition of power." He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "You are going to stay here. You are going to play the piano for him. And when he asks you about the song, you are going to tell him that your mother taught it to you, and we are going to figure out what it means before he decides you've outlived your usefulness." "What if it doesn't mean anything?" Nora pleaded. Vincent walked to the door. "Then we had better invent a lie that an old monster will believe." The atmosphere in the sunken living room had fundamentally changed. 2 nights ago, it was a sterile hospice. Now, it was an interrogation room. Carmine Marino was propped up against a mountain of pillows. He looked worse, his skin bruised and grey, his breathing assisted by a loud, rhythmic oxygen mask. But his eyes were terrifyingly sharp. The milky haze of the morphine had been dialed back. He was enduring the agony of his rotting pancreas just to stay lucid. Vincent stood by the window, his arms crossed, his presence a heavy, looming shadow. Nora sat at the Steinway. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs to hide the tremors. "Play it," Carmine hissed, pulling the oxygen mask down from his mouth. "The Chicago piece." Nora swallowed the lump of bile in her throat. She lifted her hands. She pressed the middle C. She played the song. Without the emotional weight of her memories, without the storm outside, it sounded different. It was still haunting, still drenched in a minor key sorrow, but Nora forced herself to listen to it analytically. It was repetitive, a descending scale that looped back on itself, punctuated by sharp, dissonant chords. "Stop," Carmine snapped after 2 minutes. Nora froze. The old man pointed a trembling finger at the keys. "That sequence, the one with the heavy bass. Do it again." Nora played the 4-bar progression. "She was a courier," Carmine rasped, looking at Vincent. "Varga, the piano player. We knew the Chicago outfit was keeping 2 sets of books, one for the feds, one for themselves. They didn't write down the accounts. They were too smart for that." Vincent didn't move. "Dad, it's just a song, a memory." "Don't patronize me," Carmine roared. The effort sent him into a violent coughing fit. A nurse stepped forward from the shadows, wiping bloody phlegm from his lips with a towel. Carmine pushed her away weakly. The ledger was a code, numbers translated into musical notes. Sheet music is easy to transport, easy to hide in plain sight. If she memorized the accounts, she held the keys to $50 million in offshore fronts. Nora stared at the ivory keys. The idea was absurd. It was the plot of a cheap spy novel. Her mother washed dishes until her knuckles bled. She didn't have access to $50 million. "Play it again," Carmine ordered. "Slowly. Tell me the notes." For 3 hours, Nora became a human phonograph. She played the melody. She broke it down. "C, E flat, G," Nora said, her voice hoarse. "It's a standard C minor triad." "Next," Carmine demanded. Vincent walked over to the piano. He stood right behind Nora. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the faint scent of cedar and expensive tobacco masking the hospital smell of the room. He reached over her shoulder and placed a blank sheet of staff paper and a heavy fountain pen on the music stand. "Write it down," Vincent said softly. His proximity was overwhelming. It wasn't sexual, it was entirely predatory. He was a cage built of flesh and bone, keeping her trapped in front of his father. Nora grabbed the pen. She began to notate the melody, her mother's humming, translated into black ink. As she wrote, Vincent leaned over, tracing the notes with his eyes. "There's a pattern here," Vincent murmured, almost to himself. He pointed to a recurring cluster of notes in the bass clef. "This triad repeats every 8 bars, but the top note changes. An A, then a B flat, then a D." "It's a harmonic progression," Nora said, trying not to lean away from him. "It creates tension." "Or it's a cipher," Vincent countered. He looked down at her. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the dark gold flecks in his brown eyes, the microscopic lines of stress around his mouth. "If C is a 1, E flat is a 3. We map the intervals." He pulled his phone from his pocket, typing numbers into a secure note app. Nora watched him work. She saw the shift in him. He wasn't humoring his dying father anymore. He was seeing the ghost his father saw. The syndicate boss was taking over the skeptical son. "You're actually believing this," Nora whispered, keeping her voice low enough that Carmine couldn't hear over the hiss of his oxygen. "You're looking for buried treasure in a lullaby." Vincent didn't look up from his phone. "My father slaughtered 30 people to find the Chicago ledgers. If that money still exists, it belongs to this family. And more importantly, if the Chicago survivors know it exists, they will come for it." He finally met her gaze. The warning in his eyes was absolute. "You think you're a victim, Nora," Vincent said quietly, "but you're holding a map to a landmine. We are going to defuse it before you step on it." The breakthrough happened at 2 a.m. on the 5th night. Carmine had finally slipped into a narcotic sleep, his chest barely rising. The house was dead quiet. Nora was still at the piano, her fingers aching, staring at the 5 pages of sheet music she had transcribed. Vincent was sitting on the piano bench next to her. The formal boundary between them had eroded over the last 48 hours of forced proximity. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing faded ink on his forearms. They were surrounded by legal pads filled with numbers. Vincent had cross-referenced the musical intervals with old accounting ciphers used by the mob in the 90s. "It's routing numbers," Vincent said suddenly. The exhaustion vanished from his voice, replaced by a sharp, electric clarity. Nora blinked, rubbing her burning eyes. "What?" "The recurring bass triads." Vincent tapped his pen against the sheet music. "They aren't just harmony. They frame a 9-digit sequence. Bank routing numbers. Swiss, most likely. The melody line on top, that's the account identifier." Nora looked at the notes. She tried to see money. She just saw her mother, standing over a sink, humming a secret she couldn't afford to forget. She knew, Nora whispered, a profound sense of betrayal washing over her. She had the numbers to millions of dollars in her head. "We got evicted 3 times when I was a teenager. We ate canned soup. Why didn't she use it?" Vincent looked at her. his expression softening just a fraction. It was a brutal kind of pity, because using it would have meant death, Vincent said. If she touched a single dime of that money, the Chicago families would have found her. My father would have found her. She stayed poor to keep you alive. Nora stared at the keys. A tear hit the polished wood between her hands. Anna Kovacs wasn't a sad, broken woman. She was a vault. A fiercely protective vault that had taken her secret to the grave, only to accidentally leave the combination with her daughter. Before Nora could process the grief, a sound ripped through the silence. It was a sharp, suppressed thwip, like a heavy staple gun. The front bay window, the reinforced glass built to withstand hurricane winds, shattered inward. A massive spiderweb of cracks erupted across the pane, and a split second later, a hole the size of a golf ball appeared. The heavy crystal vase, resting on the coffee table, exploded into 1,000,000 pieces. Vincent reacted with terrifying speed. He didn't yell. He didn't ask questions. He threw his weight against Nora, tackling her off the piano bench. They hit the marble floor hard. The wind knocked out of Nora's lungs in a violent rush. Vincent's body was a heavy, unyielding shield over hers, pressing her flat against the cold stone. "Stay down," Vincent ordered, pulling a compact matte black pistol from an ankle holster. More suppressed shots hit the glass. The window finally gave way, a massive sheet of it cascading into the living room like a waterfall of diamonds. The storm outside howled into the sterile room, bringing the smell of rain and salt. "Intruders!" a voice shouted from the hallway. Gunfire erupted, loud, deafening, unsuppressed bursts of automatic fire that shook the floorboards. Nora curled into a ball, covering her ears, screaming blindly into the marble. This wasn't a movie. The noise was physical, rattling her teeth. Vincent grabbed her arm, hauling her up to her hands and knees. "Crawl behind the piano!" Nora scrambled, tearing her tights, her palms slipping on the polished floor. She threw herself behind the heavy oak legs of the Steinway. Vincent slid in right behind her, keeping his back to the wood, aiming his weapon toward the shattered window. The living room doors burst open. 2 men in tactical black gear swept in. They weren't cops. They moved with a fluid, terrifying precision, aiming weapons fitted with long suppressors. They weren't looking for Vincent. They raised their guns toward the hospital bed. Vincent didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. The sound of his gun was deafening in the enclosed space. The first man dropped, his chest cratered. The second man spun, raising his rifle toward the piano. Vincent grabbed Nora by the collar, shoving her flat against the floorboards, just as a volley of bullets tore through the top of the Steinway. The beautiful polished wood splintered, a horrific screech ringing out as a bullet severed the high-tension piano wire inside. The discordant twang of the snapped wire echoed like a dying scream. Vincent leaned out from cover and fired again. The second man collapsed against the doorway, sliding down the wall, leaving a thick smear of dark blood on the white paint. Silence slammed back into the room, broken only by the frantic beeping of the heart monitor and the wind howling through the broken window. Vincent stayed perfectly still for 10 seconds, his gun trained on the doorway. When no one else entered, he lowered the weapon. He turned to Nora. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dilated. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands checking her shoulders, moving down her arms. His touch was rough, frantic. "No," Nora gasped, hyperventilating. "No, I'm okay." Vincent let out a harsh, ragged breath. He leaned his forehead against the side of the ruined piano. Across the room, the oxygen machine hissed. Carmine Marino was completely untouched in his bed. He was awake. He turned his head slowly, looking at the dead men on his floor. and then looking at his son. "Chicago," Carmine rasped, a bloody smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "They didn't come to kill me. I'm already dead." The old man's milky eyes shifted, locking onto Nora behind the piano. "They heard," Carmine whispered. "They know the girl is here." The smell of cordite was sharp, bitter, and metallic, like tasting an old copper penny. It hung in the air, thick enough to choke on, masking the scent of the ocean that poured through the shattered bay window. Vincent didn't look at his father. He kept his eyes locked on the hallway, his gun raised. The shouting downstairs had dissolved into sporadic, muffled pops of suppressed gunfire. The estate security was fighting a losing battle. "Get up," Vincent said to Nora. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a machine executing a protocol. Nora didn't move. She was staring at the man Vincent had killed, specifically at the way the blood was pooling on the pristine white grout between the marble tiles. It moved sluggishly, a dark, heavy liquid that seemed too red to be real. Vincent grabbed her shoulder, hauling her to her feet with a brutal lack of grace. I said, "Get up. Put your shoes on." "Chicago," Carmine wheezed from the bed, his voice trembling with a hideous, ecstatic energy. He didn't care about the dead men in his room. He didn't care about the storm. "They sent a hit squad. It means the money is real, Vincent. It means she has it. Make her write the rest of it down." Vincent finally turned to look at his father. There was no love left in his eyes. Only a profound, suffocating exhaustion. The loyalty that had kept Vincent tethered to this hospital bed, enduring the abuse and the paranoia, simply snapped. It didn't break with a dramatic speech. It vanished into the cold air. "No," Vincent said. Carmine's jaw worked, his milky eyes widening. "What did you say to me?" "I'm done," Vincent said, shoving his spare magazine into his pocket. He kept his hand firmly locked around Nora's bicep. "I'm not dying for a 30-year-old ledger. I'm not letting you dissect this girl for ghosts." "You coward!" Carmine roared, the effort tearing a violent cough from his lungs, speckling his oxygen mask with fresh blood. "You walk out that door. You leave this family's legacy. I'll have you gutted. I'll give the ports to the Castellanos." "You're dead in 2 weeks, anyway," Vincent replied, his tone chillingly flat. "Give the ports to whoever you want. I'm leaving." He didn't wait for a response. He dragged Nora toward the secondary door, the one that led to the servants' corridor. "Wait!" Nora gasped, her feet slipping on the slick floor. "What about him? You're just going to leave him?" "If they wanted him dead, they would have shot him first," Vincent said, pushing the heavy oak door open with his shoulder. "They want you." The servants' corridor was narrow and dimly lit. Vincent moved fast, pulling Nora down a tight spiral staircase that smelled of floor wax and old dust. The sounds of the firefight grew louder, echoing from the main foyer. "How did they know I was here?" Nora asked, her chest heaving as she struggled to keep up with his long strides. "They didn't," Vincent said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs to check the corner. "They knew a piano player was brought in. Someone on my payroll made a phone call. The Chicago outfit put the pieces together. Anna Kovach's daughter, hired to play for Carmine Marino." He looked back at her. The ambient light from the emergency exit sign cast harsh, red shadows across his face. "You aren't a secret anymore, Nora. You're a target." He pushed open the heavy fire door leading to the underground garage. It was cavernous, smelling of exhaust and damp concrete. A black Audi sedan sat idling near the exit ramp, its headlights cutting through the gloom. A man in a dark suit was slumped over the steering wheel, a neat, dark hole in the driver's side window. Vincent cursed under his breath. He shoved Nora behind a concrete pillar. "Stay here. Do not move unless I tell you." Nora pressed her back against the rough concrete, squeezing her eyes shut. She listened to the heavy, deliberate crunch of Vincent's footsteps on the gravel. She heard a car door open, a heavy thud as a body was dragged onto the pavement. "Come on," Vincent called out softly. Nora ran. She slid into the passenger seat of the Audi. The leather was warm, the dashboard glowing with an icy blue light. Vincent was already in the driver's seat, his hands flying over the controls. He didn't turn on the headlights. He slammed the car into reverse, spinning the wheel violently to angle them toward the ramp. The engine roared, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in Nora's chest. They shot up the ramp and exploded out into the storm. The rain was a solid sheet of grey, washing over the windshield in violent waves. Vincent kept the headlights off, driving entirely by memory and the faint moonlight fighting through the clouds. He swerved past the security gate, which had been blown off its hinges, the metal twisted and black. As they tore down the winding coastal highway, Nora looked in the side mirror. The Marino estate sat on the cliff, a massive, dark fortress against the raging ocean. She had survived the night. But as she looked at Vincent's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, she realized the nightmare hadn't ended. It had only just relocated. The safe house wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a heavily guarded mansion. It was a cinder-block fishing cabin perched on a decaying dock in an unincorporated coastal town 3 hours north of the city. It smelled like mold, stale beer, and salt rot. There was one room, a rusted kitchenette, and a sagging mattress on a metal frame. The only source of heat was a small space heater that buzzed like an angry hornet. Vincent locked the deadbolt, pulled the heavy blackout curtains closed, and finally dropped his gun onto the Formica counter. He didn't say a word. He walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and washed his face. When he looked up, bracing his hands on the edge of the aluminum basin, his shoulders were slumped. The adrenaline had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked like a hollowed-out shell. Nora stood awkwardly by the door, her ruined tights clinging to her freezing legs. She was shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Vincent turned around, noticed her shaking, and opened a battered wooden wardrobe. He pulled out a thick, grey wool blanket and tossed it to her. "Strip your wet clothes. Wrap yourself in that," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. He began digging through a duffel bag on the floor. Nora didn't argue. Her hands were clumsy with cold as she peeled off her soaked dress and tights. She wrapped the heavy wool around her shoulders, the coarse fabric scratching against her skin. But it trapped her body heat almost instantly. She sat on the edge of the mattress. Vincent turned back around. He was holding a first aid kit and a bottle of cheap whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a plastic cup and handed it to her. "Drink." Nora took it. The liquor burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling heavy and warm in her stomach. It forced a ragged cough from her lungs, but the shivering began to subside. "Who knew?" Nora asked, staring at the plastic cup. Vincent sat in the only chair in the room, a creaking wooden spindle chair across from the bed. The nurse, the security detail, my father's inner circle. Someone realized the Chicago melody was back in play and decided to cash out by selling the information. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Chicago doesn't want my father. They want the numbers, and they will tear apart the entire eastern seaboard to find you." Nora gripped the blanket tighter. "I don't know the numbers, Vincent. You saw me. It's just a song. Even if you translate the intervals, how do you know what account they belong to? How do you access it?" Vincent sighed, a long, ragged sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded, crumpled sheets of staff paper Nora had written on just hours before the gunfire started. He smoothed them out on the small, wobbly coffee table between them. Before the shooting started, I mapped the first half, Vincent said softly. He pulled a pen from his jacket. You said the melody repeats, but the top notes change. It's a dual cipher. He drew a quick grid on the back of the last page. My father's men tortured a Chicago lieutenant 20 years ago, Vincent explained, pointing to the table with his pen. He told them the accounts were held in a private Swiss bank that didn't use names, only numerical identifiers. But you needed a passphrase to unlock the funds, a physical voice authorization. Nora stared at the grid. The math was brutal in its simplicity. So even if they get the numbers from me, they can't get the money without the password. Exactly, Vincent said. Which means they need you alive to play the entire song so they can map the rest of the routing numbers. But more importantly, they believe your mother told you the password. She didn't, Nora cried, frustration and despair rising in her chest. She didn't tell me anything. She just hummed. She hummed when she washed dishes. She hummed when she folded laundry. She hummed when the lights got shut off because she couldn't pay the electric bill. Nora stopped. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She looked at Vincent. His dark eyes were fixed on her, watching the memory assemble itself in her mind. She didn't just hum the melody, Nora whispered, the blood draining from her face. She sang lyrics. Sometimes. In Hungarian. Vincent went completely still. What lyrics? Nora swallowed hard. The memory was buried deep, obscured by time and childhood ignorance. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back to the cramped, freezing apartment in Queens. She pictured her mother's scarred back, her tired hands in soapy water. The river freezes in November, Nora translated aloud, her voice trembling. The sparrows die in the snow. Only the quiet survive the winter. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the angry hum of the space heater. That's it, Vincent said. His voice was a harsh whisper. That's the passphrase. Only the quiet survive the winter. Nora opened her eyes. Tears were spilling over her lashes, hot and fast. She knew. She knew the whole time. We starved, Vincent. We literally went hungry, and she had $50 million sitting in a vault. She had $50 million of blood money, Vincent corrected gently. It was the softest she had ever heard him speak. Money stolen from cartels, from syndicates, from men who skin people alive for looking at them wrong. If she'd touched that money, she would have painted a target on your back, the size of Manhattan. He stood up and walked over to the mattress. He knelt in front of her, bringing himself down to her eye level. Look at me, he commanded softly. Nora met his gaze. Your mother didn't choose poverty because she was weak, Vincent said, his eyes burning with a fierce, quiet intensity. She chose it because it was the only armor she could afford. She locked herself in a cage of obscurity so you could grow up without ever knowing what gunpowder smells like. She was the strongest person in that club. Nora broke. A sob tore from her throat, raw and agonizing. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, weeping for the woman she had misunderstood her entire life. Vincent didn't pull away. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just reached out, placing a heavy, warm hand on the back of her head, anchoring her as she shattered. They stayed like that for a long time in the dim, damp cabin. A mafia boss and a hotel pianist, bound together by the ghosts of a 30-year-old war. At dawn, the storm finally broke. The sky over the grey, churning ocean turned the color of bruised iron. Vincent was sitting at the small Formica table. He had a burner phone pressed to his ear. Nora watched him from the mattress, the wool blanket still wrapped tightly around her. "I don't care what your lieutenants want, Rossi," Vincent said into the phone. His voice wasn't the tired, broken man from the night before. It was the voice of a man who controlled armies. "I have the girl, I have the sheet music, I have the translation matrix, and I have the passphrase in Hungarian." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. His jaw tightened. "You want it? You can have it," Vincent said smoothly. "All of it. Every dime." Nora sat up abruptly. Her heart hammered in her throat. He was selling her out. "Here are my terms," Vincent continued, his eyes locking onto Nora from across the room. He held her gaze, a silent command to stay calm. "You get the routing's numbers and the passphrase. In exchange, the war ends today. Your hit squad leaves my territory. But most importantly, the girl is dead." Another pause. "I'm telling you, Rossi, I put a bullet in her head myself," Vincent lied, his voice chillingly convincing. "She was a loose end. I burned the body. The only copy of the cipher and the passphrase is in my hands. If anyone from your outfit ever looks into Anna Kovac or her bloodline again, I will burn the cipher, and that 50 million will sit in a Swiss vault until the sun burns out." He listened for 30 seconds. "Good doing business with you," Vincent said. He hung up. He dropped the burner phone onto the table and picked up a heavy Zippo lighter. He sparked it. The flame illuminated the hollows of his cheeks. He picked up the sheet music, the 5 pages Nora had meticulously transcribed, the cipher grid, the lyrics. He held them over the flame. The paper caught instantly, curling and blackening. He dropped the burning pages into the aluminum sink, watching as 30 years of bloodshed, paranoia, and $50 million turned into grey ash. Nora watched the smoke rise, her chest tight. "Why did you do that?" "I didn't burn the memory," Vincent said, turning on the faucet to wash the ashes down the drain. "I memorized the routing numbers and the phrase before I called him. I'll write them down, mail them to Rossi's secure drop in Chicago, and he'll take his money." "You just gave them $50 million, Nora said, stunned. "I bought you your life," Vincent corrected, turning to face her. "Chicago believes you are dead. My father's men believe Chicago killed you in the raid. As of this morning, Nora Kovac doesn't exist in the syndicate world." Vincent's regular cell phone, sitting on the table, buzzed violently. It was a sterile, sharp sound. He walked over and looked at the screen. He stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. He swiped to answer and held it to his ear. "I understand," Vincent said quietly. "Make the arrangements. I'll be back in the city by noon." He hung up. "My father passed away an hour ago," Vincent said. His voice was completely void of emotion. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't relief. It was simply a factual statement. The tyrant was dead. The throne was empty. "I'm sorry," Nora said instinctively. "Don't be," Vincent replied, picking up his suit jacket from the back of the chair. He shrugged it on, the tailored lines instantly transforming him back into the untouchable boss of the Marino family. He died chasing a ghost. I won't make the same mistake. He walked over to the mattress. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, much thicker than the one he had given her at the St. Jude Hotel. He placed it on the mattress beside her. "There's $200,000 in there. Clean cash," Vincent said. "It's not 50 million, but it's enough to disappear. Move to the West Coast. Change your name. Buy a house with a piano that doesn't have dead keys." Nora looked at the envelope. It was freedom. Absolute, unadulterated freedom. The crushing weight of poverty, the fear of loan sharks, the shadows of the mafia. It was all gone. She looked up at Vincent. "What about you?" "I have to go back," Vincent said. The exhaustion was creeping back into his eyes. "I have a family to run. I have to clean up the mess my father left behind." "You don't have to be him," Nora said quietly. Vincent looked at her. Really looked at her. For a fleeting second, the wall cracked, and she saw the man who had held her while she cried, the man who had thrown himself over her in a hail of bullets, the man who had just burned a fortune to keep her safe. "I know," Vincent said softly. He didn't touch her. He didn't kiss her. It wasn't that kind of story. It was a story of survival. He gave her one last, lingering look, committing her face to memory, before turning and walking out the door of the cabin. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. The lock engaged. Nora was alone. She sat on the edge of the mattress, wrapped in the wool blanket, listening to the roar of the Audi's engine, fading into the distance over the sound of the crashing waves. She reached out and rested her hand on the envelope. Her fingers trembled. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the cold, salty air. In her mind, she didn't hear the terrifying, dissonant chords of the Chicago cipher. She didn't hear the gunfire. She just heard her mother, humming a quiet, peaceful tune. A melody that didn't hold secrets, or death, or money. Just a simple, beautiful song for a girl who had finally survived the winter. Sometimes survival doesn't come with a fairy tale romance. It comes with a heavy envelope of clean cash, a locked door, and the quiet strength to walk away. Vincent chose to inherit his father's bloody empire so Nora wouldn't have to die for it. He let her go, and in doing so, finally broke the cycle of his family's ruthless greed. If this grounded, dark mafia drama kept you hooked until the very last note, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a gritty thriller and subscribe to the channel for more raw, unapologetic storytelling.